Welcome back to the RightTurnRandy channel. Not sure how you guys are gonna feel about this one. The Tide car is down right now and I can't really make much progress on it because I don't have the harmonic balancer that I'm waiting for or the MSD distributor. It's gonna be a while until I get that stuff. So today I figured that I would try to fill this thing back up and brew some beer. So in this video, we're gonna take a little break from the car, and in this little black book right here, I have beer recipes, and I'm gonna brew a batch of beer today. Heading down here, it's been a couple years since I've brewed a batch of beer. I used to do it a lot in California. I've probably brewed about 50 or 60 gallons total, but since I've been out here in Indiana, I've only brewed a couple of batches, I think, and the last one I brewed was, I think it was 2 years ago I brewed the last batch. I used to enjoy it a lot when I was out in California. But I haven't had any homebrew in a while, so I think it's time to dust off that equipment and see if I still remember how to do it. I have to drive quite a ways, not too far, to get to the local homebrew supply out here. And it's not easy to find. It's not easy to find. Why is it hard to find, you ask? Well, it's kind of cool to have like a bike shop that's got like all this brewing stuff in the back. It's like sort of speakeasy-ish, you know?
Well, yeah, the way the whole thing started, frankly, was my boss has been brewing for 20-odd years, and there's a local club that every year would order a bunch of grain from this company. And since we're a store open all the time, it just kind of was easier to just have all the grain delivered here, and then the different people in the group that ordered whatever would come and pick up their grain.
Right.
But the company kept making noise. This is the best way I find to open these things. I sit on the starter and pop it up. About not selling to clubs anymore. They only wanted to sell to stores.
Yeah.
They said that this year, then that next year they said the same thing, then the next year they said the same thing, and finally they put their foot down and said, no, we're not selling to clubs anymore. It has to be a store. Sign us up.
It's like, we've got a store.
Yeah, we're a store, you know.
All right, so I got all my grain down here in the box. I've got the hops at home, and I have the yeast in there too. So, and I think I paid for this, I only paid like, cost around $30 to brew 5 gallons of beer, which works out to something like $6 a gallon, which is much better than you get at the bar, isn't that right?
Much better. All grain. That even cuts the cost from like the kits down another 30% almost.
That's right.
It's a little more work, obviously. But if you got the equipment, I've made some mistakes, but I've made some good beers.
Well, here comes another customer.
Cool.
So, right, so we got our stuff. We're gonna go home and brew this beer. Thank you, sir.
Thank
I appreciate
you.
it.
Have a good day.
You too.
Enjoy your hobby.
Oh, I will. Pretty much all my brewing stuff is in the detached garage here. Keep the tractor, and then all my brewing stuff's right over here. Lighting. So I'm gonna pick up all this stuff, take it into the garage, and get started. Man, I forgot. Brewing beer takes a lot of stuff. Got stuff to filter the water, which I'm on a well here, so I'll be filtering well water. This is called the mash tun. I have this 5-gallon carboy right there. I've got to make some sanitizer. A couple pots for sparge water, strike water, and then of course this giant apparatus here, which is a lot faster for heating 5 gallons of water than, say, your stove in your kitchen. So here goes. Hope it turns out okay. All right, so we start with filtered well water straight out of the ground. So we'll get this thing filled up here. We need about 7.5 gallons. So of that 7.5 gallons, you can see right over there, of water, we need 3.5 of that to go into this, and that's going to be heated up to mix with the barley in this thing over here, which is called a mash tun, and that is called strike water. Once we heat that up, we're gonna heat that to a very specific temperature, 167 degrees, somewhere around there. All right, let's get this baby going. There we go. This is getting pretty close to 162 there. As soon as that hits 162, I'm gonna turn off the heat, and then I'm gonna pour all that water down into the mash tun, this big orange thing right here. Once it all goes in the mash tun, then I'm gonna take all the grain and slowly pour it in there. This is 11 pounds of 2 different kinds of grain, Maris Otter and some kind of Pilsner, I think caramel 15 or caramel 20, something like that. I usually just rip a corner. It's important during this part to let the grain go in there sort of slowly, because if you just dump it all in one go, it'll clump up. It smells a little bit like Cheez-Its, kind of. The grain going in there will bring the temperature down to about 157 degrees, 156 if I remember correctly. And then that's where you want it to sit, and you want it to hold at that temperature, because that's the perfect temperature to convert all those grains into sugars that the yeast can then eat and make alcohol. Now as soon as you get all that grain in there, you want to start a timer, because this stuff's got to cook in here for about an hour or so. It's all mixed up, lid goes on it, and we wait. You want to stir it every 15 minutes or so, 10 minutes, just to keep things moving. So right now, this is still cooking away. It's got another more than half hour left, and pretty soon we're gonna start boiling, or not boiling, but heating up the rest of that water, because I'm gonna be using it to sparge the grain, which is essentially rinsing all of the sugars off of it. The rest of the water is gonna go in here now. Oh, do not drop this. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, yeah. It should be right around 4 gallons, just a little more than 4 gallons. And I hesitated for a second because I remembered that I need to pour this water needs to be poured through the grain to rinse it off, but then after it gets rinsed through the grain, it needs to go back into here. So I obviously can't be pouring this into that and then have it go back into this. That's not gonna work. But I need the thermometer on this to be able to know what temperature this water is. So I'm going to heat it up to the temperature it's supposed to be, but probably about 2-3 degrees more to compensate for the heat that's gonna get pulled out of it when I put it into that pot. Then I'm gonna transfer it into that pot and then use the water from that pot in the mash tun there to then filter all of the grain and get all of that, what's called wort, into the pot here to then boil it. I hope that wasn't too confusing. It sounds confusing when I explain it. So we'll get this heated up so that it'll be ready to go when this is done cooking. And something interesting to note, that water is coming out of the ground at like 55 degrees. This just started heating up, but that's pretty cold. It takes a while to heat it all up. The good thing about that is that when we need to take the pre-beer, the unfermented beer, and cool it back down very quickly so that we can then pitch the yeast into it, that cold water coming out of the tap out there is gonna be very convenient, running through this copper coil here to help and cool that wort down and get it to a temperature that we can throw the yeast in. Usually I like to throw the yeast in about 70 to 75 degrees. If you throw it in hotter, it will start the reaction faster, but it could kill off some of the yeast if you get it too hot. I usually typically like to pitch it around the mid 70s. All right, I always use one of my big old mugs for this, so why break tradition? So now the way this works is you've got all this grain and all this liquid in here. and that's got to go down into here, but you don't want all the grain in there with it. So at the bottom of this is this mesh filter thing, and once you start getting the water to go down through that, or the liquid to go down through that, it will form like a layer where all the little stuff gets through, but there's bigger stuff on top of that that filter. It develops I think it's called a grain bed, and then the liquid will eventually run clear, but you got to start taking a few mugs of that stuff out, and you'll see it's not clear. But once you take a few mugs out, it starts to clear up quite a bit, and then you can start allowing it to go into this pan here, because you don't want a whole bunch of that stuff getting into the pan, all the holes and the stuff that you don't want to drink. So let's start by trying to get some of this stuff. Actually, we don't even want the first little bit that comes out of there, the water, the actual water, because that's been sitting in there and it's not hot. It gets a lot of those grains and chunks. You can see all that stuff in there. Like, you don't want that floating around in your beer. So we'll dump that back into the top and then go for another one. And you want to keep doing this until that liquid starts running out, like pretty clear. It doesn't have to be perfect, but until you're getting like, you're not getting the big chunks of barley in there anymore. Because you can see there's still a ton of those big chunks. It looks like oatmeal water almost. So you can see a little bit of what that grain looks like in there. You can see the water swirling down. Let's try to add it evenly. I like to do it along the edges. I try not to dump a bunch in there and disturb that grain bed down there. You can see the grain bed when it comes up a little bit. It's no big deal if it comes up a little, but if it starts really swirling around in there, it can mess up your filter at the bottom, because you're using all those grain holes to filter the wort. And I really need to rig up something for this, because this is really tedious. And it gets old after a while. Doing 4 gallons like this, I gotta rig something up for the next batch. Alright, got the last mug of water going in there. And you can see how the water on top is really clear now. And also over here, you see this coming out of the tap right there is getting really clear. It's almost like water coming out of there. And it's carrying the last remnants of the sugars that are in this grain. But this is pretty well drained out. Once you get down to this point where it's just dribbling out and it's, you know, almost water. I mean, this is really, it's mostly water that you're adding. You could kill it about here and end up with, you know, still plenty of sugars in there to ferment into alcohol. So really, when this stops flowing about here, you want to shut it off and let it go. I'm gonna let it go another minute or so and then kill it, and then we got to start boiling this. So now with about 6 gallons, in my experience, if you boil for about an hour, you'll end up with a gallon of reduction. Now the reason you boil it is to concentrate the sugars down in the water, and then you can end up with a more flavorful beer and higher alcohol content also. So now we'll move this stuff and we'll get this fired up, start boiling again. The way this liquid sits right now, you can taste it, you can drink it, and it tastes like very, very sweet beer. The first time I ever had it, I was surprised at how sweet it was, how much sugar was in it. Now, something you want to be extremely careful of is once you get up around 205 degrees, you really got to start watching this thing, because once it starts to boil, if you have the lid on, you'll end up with a huge mess on your hands because it will boil over and go everywhere. I've never had it happen to me, but I have come very, very close. All of the foam starts to boil up to the surface because it can quickly get out of hand. This little open patch starting to form right here, and the bubble's starting to come up. That's when you can tell that it's getting ready to break pretty soon. Right now, it's at about 195 degrees, but it's getting close. Now it's up at about 206, 207, and it's starting to get close. So you can see there's more foam, but not a whole lot, and that spot is getting much bigger. Sometimes you'll get one that's like a nice soft break, and it just starts rolling, and then everything's all good, but other ones you'll get them, it'll start rolling, and then the whole thing will just rise like that and try to come out of the pot. I think this one's gonna be pretty calm, but it's getting awfully close. You can see it start to really come up on this side. There it goes. Now it's gonna try to boil over. But you'll see it start to split on the bubbles, and then it'll calm itself down if it can split and come through. You do not want it to boil over because it makes a hell of a mess. Shoot, get my mash paddle. Let's try to stir it a little bit until it calms down. Yeah, this is actually a little tough to control. Ooh, easy, easy, easy. There we go. So that looks pretty okay. I think that'll be under control now. And you can sit there and just let it boil like that, and it shouldn't boil over from there. So we'll set a timer for 1 hour. Alright, we got 45 minutes left of the boil. It's only been 15 minutes. We're gonna take the first set of hops, which, man, these smell so good. It's like a lemony, citrusy, flowery. Oh, it just smells so delicious. I love the smell of hops. Absolutely love it. Now, when you add these in here, you got to be careful because sometimes, especially with the pellet hops, because they expand almost instantly. So the thing could want to try to boil over again. So be careful and watch for that. Fast forward, we have about 15 minutes left for this thing to boil until it's completely done. So there's 3 things we're going to put in there at this point. This right here, which is called a wort chiller, that's going to go in there. And the reason that goes in is so that it can be heated up and sanitized so that it's not going to have any nasties on it when we start cooling the whole thing down. Next is a healthy pinch of this stuff called Irish moss. And it's really hard to put too much of this stuff in there, but you only need like about, I think it's like a tablespoon or something. I can't really remember. We'll put in a little tiny bit extra. I've got a lot of it. But just throw in like, you know, a little splash of that stuff. And what that does is it clings to the proteins inside the wort and makes the beer more clear when you're all done with it, instead of being cloudy. But a homebrew beer is usually pretty cloudy. And the last thing we're gonna throw in there is the rest of our hops, the same kind, same stuff, an ounce. Still smells just as delicious as the last one. So we're gonna toss that right in there. Now all that's gonna sit just like that for 15 minutes, and then we'll go on to the next step. Now I think the best way to do this is if you get your lines hooked up to where they go from outside to inside, and then another line that goes back outside. So if you have the hose coming in here with the water supply, going through the coil, and then going back out through another hose outside, it's much better, because if you have wind and stuff blowing around outside, and anything gets inside that after it's cool, and it could contaminate the whole thing. Once you shut this thing off, it's okay, because it's still hot. It's going to stay hot for a bit, so you don't have to worry about anything contaminating it right now. But I usually cover the whole top with aluminum foil, because I can't get the lid on there, obviously. So I'll cover the whole top with aluminum foil, and then I'll start running that chiller to bring the temperature down. You can see the temperature down there, and once you get it down to about 80-ish degrees, then I'll take it over to the table and start moving it into the glass carboy over there, which is a big glass jug that holds 5 gallons. All right, and then all you gotta do is just head outside and gently turn your water on. See, this pipe now is ice cold coming out of there, in there. And you can feel this is pretty warm coming out. But we want to get that down to about 75, 80 degrees, something like that. 80 degrees would be okay. And it should only take a couple minutes to do that. So now next we have to get this thing out of there. I usually keep the bucket right next door so that I can lift this thing out of there, and I take it with the tin foil on and everything and just drop it in the bucket. Once it goes in the bucket, I have the lid for this over there. Now the lid, I will spray with sanitizer before I bring it over, and then I'll try to really quickly swap this copper thing out with that lid. Once that lid is on, if that lid is sanitized, then I can leave this sitting and it's gonna be okay for a while. From now on, everything that touches that liquid, anything that touches the liquid that's inside this, has to be absolutely clean and sanitized. And this is a sciencey part. It's pretty cool. We want to take a sample of this stuff, which we can take it from the bottom. If there's a whole bunch of stuff in there, it doesn't really matter. Then into this goes this thing called a hydrometer. You drop that in to check, and it will tell us what's called the initial gravity. 1.050 is the initial gravity reading, which that's a reading of how much sugar is in that liquid. And just because I'm curious, I'm going to take a little sip of this. It tastes sweet, but very bitter because the hops are in there. Oh. Yeah. Yeah, I remember that's what it tastes like. Ah, not good. But it's gonna get much better. It's gonna get much better. Now, some people pour this stuff back in. I never pour this back in. It's not worth risking contaminating the beer just for that little bit of beer right there. So for this part, I will go and wash my hands and wash all the pieces that are gonna be coming into contact with that liquid. I have this bottle of sanitizer right here, and I will liberally spray everything. Just, it's simple. Just spray everything. Spray down everything. And even your hands. Keep your hands clean. And your hands will get dried out if you spray them too much with this stuff. But it's not that big a deal. Just a little bit's going to be totally fine. Take some of the sanitizer that we made earlier. And we'll dump some of this in here. Just enough that we can slosh it around and coat the inside of that with it. So now my hands are going to get dirty from touching this, but I can go wash them again. So I just put my hand over it like that. Get a really good grip on it because you don't want to drop this thing. This is an Italian carboy, 5 gallons. And you don't need to go absolutely crazy. Just make sure that that liquid touches all the surfaces inside. That's all you really need to do. Just make sure that it touches all the surfaces. We're going to throw that puppy in there. If we touch the outside of the hose with hands that aren't super clean, it's not that big a deal because it's the inside that's important. Alright, so now we're going to slowly open this up, and we'll try to get just the liquid. You don't want to start it too fast, because if you start it too fast, it'll start picking up all that junk off the bottom, and you don't want any of the junk off the bottom. So if you start nice and slow, you can get it going, and hopefully it doesn't pick up too much of that stuff. Alright, so you can see that stuff getting aerated in there, and you can see it's coming out relatively clear through the line. Not super clear, but it's good enough. And then the temperature, what's that? 72 degrees, perfect. Alright, that's actually a little more full than I wanted, but that's okay. It's gonna end up working out. So we'll hit this with, we had some of the wort spilled on the outside, and we don't want that stuff just sitting on the outside, so we're gonna get that nice and sanitized in there. You can barely see the top of this, but I have to pour some of this stuff in the side here, and then this piece goes in like that, and that keeps it from back feeding in there, keeps bacteria and stuff from getting back in. Pop that off one last time, and then dump this whole thing in there. I'm excited. I haven't brewed beer in a long time. I can't wait. So there she is, all snugged up in the closet. You can already see some stuff starting to float and move around in there. I don't know if you can see it on camera very well. But this thing is all finished. All I have to do now is just wait, and we'll check in on it and see what it looks like tomorrow. Alright, it's the next morning. I have not looked in here yet. Looks like it's off to a pretty good start. It's not overflowing, which is good. There you go, it's been 5 days now, and this thing is really just cooking right along. Still making lots of carbon dioxide, still bubbling a ton. You can see sort of a little bit of the cloudiness is gone. Still a ton of those bubbles on there, but this thing will still need another week and a half or so before it's ready to go. So all the beer has been taken out of this and put into the keg, which that's completely full all the way to the top now, and it's hooked up to the gas, and it's hooked up to the, should be the center spout on this. It's gonna be all foam probably. There we go. Okay. It's got maybe a little bit of carbonation there, and you can see all the floaters in there. It's been a long time since I brewed a batch of beer. All right, let's see what it tastes like. Pretty bitter. It's not sweet at all. It might be a bit dry. I wonder what the gravity is. Alright, let's very quickly get the gravity on this to see what it is. Because it started at something 55, I think. I think it was 1055. They usually finish around 1010 or 1011. So let's see where this is at. It's definitely done. So it looks like it finished at right at 10. 010, and that's usually where a beer finishes at. So this should be, according to my calculations, I can't remember if it's 6 or 7%, something like that, but it's definitely got alcohol in it, that's for sure. So now all that's left to do is to leave it out here to cool down, because it will absorb more CO2 the colder it is. We're gonna leave it set for a few days and let it carbonate, and then we'll try it. Sneak peek upcoming video, working on the front accessories for the car. We've got the water pumps on, having some trouble with the alternator. That's all gonna come in a video very soon. We've got the pressure on this thing up to 10 PSI, and it is ready to serve. Should be carbonated enough. Yeah, it's got a ton of carbonation. Gotta let it settle out for a little bit. And there you have it. Beer. This is pretty much like the classic picture, like in a cartoon when you see a beer or some kind of drawing. Color's right. Nice creamy head on top. Oh, it feels so good to make your own stuff and then to drink it. So let's see what we've got here. Oh man, that is cool and refreshing. So there you have it. When you're waiting on parts, which I'm not waiting on parts anymore, I have them now. But keep yourself occupied. You could always brew some beer. In this video, I've given you all of the basics. There's little minute things here and there in the process that can not make or break your beer really, except for the cleanliness part is extremely important. But if you want to go give this a shot yourself, you can get kits for like 50 bucks on Amazon. Some of them are very good kits. I started with all grain brewing, so I don't know anything about extract brewing, but a lot of people start with extract brewing, which is essentially like this paste of the stuff that I started with and turned this into beer, the liquid. It's essentially a concentrate that you mix water with, and it turns into the liquid that you eventually brew into beer. But I like doing the all grain stuff. I started with just an all grain kit. And if anything, it's a really great experience to do this kind of thing yourself. So Cheers, thank you for watching. Car content will be coming back really shortly. As usual, thank you guys so much for watching. If you like the videos, please subscribe, and I will see you next time.